prior to the imposition of capitalism and imperialism and these versions of it dominating, coming out of the West and Europe, different approaches might have been more viable. But at this point, and this is why Rodney goes through the difference between African communalism and scientific socialism, in part being the management of new contradictions and gaps and class divisions that arise. He's saying in this world we need something. That's how I interpret. So it wasn't to say so. And then I wasn't attempting to bring up Kwanzaa or Kawadia in an abstract sort of critical way, but to say specifically again that because there is an absence of politics in the practice or the reference to these traditions, again, specifically, collective economics can get rebranded as Black capitalism, and it's happening too much. And I made the specific reference to one bank, One United Bank, again, adorning itself in Kwanzaa while telling everybody to sign up for their bank account. And then the last thing is when you make the point about nobody can create principles, that's precisely how I read Africans engaging Marx in Marxism or socialism. That is, Marx didn't invent socialism. He didn't invent the critique of capitalism. He gave maybe the strongest, best analysis of capitalism that can be applied, as Marx said himself, should be applied by people in their particular situations. So just as, again, Kwame Ture, obviously, I know you know this and others will know this, but as he was always saying, we don't dismiss gravity because it was identified by Newton any more than we should dismiss socialism because it was identified by Marx. So we certainly wouldn't tell African people not to build or fly an aircraft simply because the science behind it was identified, not created, but identified by whites. So that's all I'm saying.
But the thing is that all of those things were identified by us already. But if you don't know your history and culture, then you won't know that. So that's my point. In terms of
wait a minute, real quick.
Gravity was not discovered by Newton. Okay, gravity was not discovered by Isaac Newton.
I didn't say it was discovered by. I said, as Kwame Ture did, he identified the principles.
Whether it's identified or not, it was still not first identified by Newton. That's my point. It was not.
Okay, all right.
So to make your entree into that under the premise that this is the person that identified those principles, that's false. That's the whole point.
Okay, let me rephrase that as Kwame. Okay, the point was he is given credit for having identified the principles.
By whom?
And he is taught. Oh, but that's my point, though. But the point would be we wouldn't ignore those principles simply because he's credited with them. And if you were going to build a plane today to fly, it would be what's a good word for it? It would
I get that.
Woeful to ignore the science contributed to aircraft by whites simply because whites did it. So it's not to valorize them or to make them the center of, but it is to acknowledge their contribution to a project that we might want to engage in. That's all.
But this is kind of two different things. We're talking about a law of gravity, which is an immutable law, as opposed to an analysis of so-called material conditions and things. It's a little bit different, so that's not necessarily.
I don't know if I would agree with that. I don't know if I would agree with that.
Well, we're talking about gravity, okay? That's a law.
But we're talking about the
nature.
science of redistribution.
It's a law of nature.
But there's also a science to the creation and the production of what a society needs and distributing it as such. There is a science there.
Well, but it's over reliance on materialism again, which is a Western thing. Westerners, they believe this Copernican notion of a material universe. Africans and Asians and indigenous people here, we understood. Now, I don't buy the whole notion that we were just purely spiritual and we just, obviously we built monumental megalithic structures that were aligned with the universe. So we understood science, and we also understood that there was an immaterial reality that went beyond what we see. And so for us, it was not just an evaluation based on material conditions. It was based on a moral ethic. And so we were able to distribute, you know, the wealth. I mean, we didn't even have a concept of this of ownership of land and all of that. We understood that we looked at everything as sacred. And so again, out of our value system, we were able to come up with economic systems. And I'm talking about all indigenous peoples on the planet. We're able to come up with value systems that were far more equitable, and did not necessarily need to have, again, some treatise, which shows again that we actually already had these principles working at play. The native people did not have a concept of selling land. When the cracker comes over here and gives them some beads and a few dollars, and to them, that is interpreted as selling the land. The indigenous people they have absolutely no concept at all. So to the extent that we need to update the culture, we agree with that. Nobody's disagreed to say that African culture or whatever indigenous culture should just remain fixed. To the extent that we need to understand the culture is the same extent that the native need to understand, because they thought that they were, as Clark said, that they were dealing with a human being when they came across the European, and they were not. The Africans thought that they were dealing with human beings, and they were not. The people of Australia, New Zealand, the South Pacific, wherever you want to go on the planet, the people of color who dealt with the Europeans assumed that this person was a human being like they were, and they were not. So to the extent that we need to update the culture, that's what we need to do. We need to understand who the hell we're dealing with and deal with them accordingly. And that's the problem. That's one of the problems with culture, that I will agree that some people get so caught up in the principles to the point where they want to still interact with these people as if, you know, they're just human beings and we just need to learn how to love each other and get along with each other. I totally disagree with that. I think we have a very long, year long history of dealing with these folks to realize that we have to deal with them a lot differently. So to that extent, I definitely agree with you.
But if you, all right, but dismissing Black engagement with socialist or Marxist
I didn't do that.
ideas, I'm not saying you, I'm saying to anyone who dismisses that engagement as engaging, as was said to me repeatedly, dead white men's ideas, is missing everything and missing the point. And primarily it's because they don't read Marx and they don't read Black radicals who engage Marx. There's no way you could be doing all this reading and be reaching these conclusions.